Good morning, everyone. I am Sneha Jadhav, your host today, and welcome to Weekly Wednesday on Driverless World School. I'm a PM in data space, have been in IoT space too. And today we have with us David Kerrigan. David, welcome. David is an experienced professional in, you can name it, autonomous retail and healthcare AI. He's written several books, and he is back with us today to talk about AI. And thank you so much.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sneha. And good morning, everybody. I hope you're well. What I'll do, as Sneha said, what I wanted to talk about today under the banner of AI is to take a little bit of a different perspective today and talk much more from a business point of view. So my own background is much more commercial, even though I'm capable of standing up in front of a class and talking fairly technical about AI. I'm not going to do that today, won't put you through it. We'll just look at things from the business perspective, much more from the consumer and business operations points of view. I do welcome questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fly through the slides as quickly as possible and then hopefully leave a bit of time at the end. But if you do have a burning question in the meantime, then interruptions are still welcome. But otherwise, I'll just keep talking fast so that we get through it and get on to have a bit of a conversation. So what I want to do today is talk about how we think about AI. So looking at innovation. So if you're in an organization, and when I use the phrase organization, I do mean it can be a federal body, it can be a government, or it can be a for-profit commercial operation. So it covers the whole space. We try and get it through as many different scenarios as possible today. But how do you think about innovation, and what part does AI play if you're sitting in an organization trying to move things forward? What are some approaches that may or may not work in your space? So there are a few questions that I want to hopefully cover off in the next 35 minutes. And that's really kind of saying, first off, at a basic level, does your organization need AI? How do you then approach innovation? And to bear in mind, as we go through this, there are no bad questions. So I'm not selling anything here except awareness. So I'm not, here to guide you and say the Google Cloud is better than the Microsoft Cloud or the Amazon Cloud. I'm very much platform agnostic. It's around finding business solutions, not finding technology solutions. But I do think it's very important to consider AI. And I think it's a big mistake not to consider it. But it is okay if you choose that AI doesn't work for your business, that doesn't suit you at this time. The main thing I would ask is that you make sure that's an informed choice and that you really think about it, you educate yourself. And the fact that you're here today is a great start, but that you educate yourself about what is possible with the current state of AI and how that relates to your business goals. So I was lying slightly. This, I promise, is the only misinformation in the whole presentation when I said I wasn't selling anything. I do have a book about AI for anybody who wants to read more about it. But I think I'm not the only one selling AI as a concept. You have everybody from Google CEO is very excited about it. I mean, Sundar is on record as saying that he thinks it's the most profound thing we're doing, and it will have as big an impact on society as something like electricity. So, they're fairly big hyperbolic words that we're using here. But I think we do also have to remember that, what's the attitude to artificial intelligence outside Silicon Valley, outside the tech sector? What do people think about AI? And to be honest, it's a fairly skeptical view in an awful lot of the businesses that I work with. They look at you and they hear these grand claims. And they've been burnt before about whether technology is really going to solve their problems. And I think the comparison to when Sundar said, electricity as an analogy, it's quite valid. Because if you know anything about the history of electricity and when it started to take over from steam, it was a tough transition. People were skeptical. They didn't think that this electricity thing was a miracle. They thought it was quite dangerous. They thought also that things worked pretty well with steam. And what they found that we can learn when we try and look at moving towards an AI-powered world, we can learn that you have to change your business to take advantage of the new technology. So the factories that tried to just replace a steam engine with an electric motor didn't see a benefit. The ones that benefited were the factories that reorganized around the strengths of electric motors. So the fact that it could be distributed around the business rather than a single central boiler in an organization. So you need to be willing to make organizational changes. And that's why I think taking this AI perspective from business is so important. You can't just get absorbed, cool as it is, in neural networks and GANs and whatever other acronyms you have to learn to talk AI. There are all of these business challenges that really make the difference. So what's the biggest change really, and I like to slim things down instead of talking about the rather generic AI and talk specifically about machine learning. And what it does primarily is it changes the scope of what we can automate. So previously, technology, just straightforward coding, allowed us to automate quite a lot of things. AI changes that because of what is from a slightly technical point of view. So I promised I probably wouldn't talk technology and introduce new acronyms today, but I do like to talk about certain concepts. And one that I find very useful is Polanyi's paradox. And Polanyi was a philosopher who said that an awful lot of our knowledge is very, very difficult to codify. It's very hard to write it down and turn knowledge into instructions. And of course, computers have traditionally needed instructions. So if you try and describe to somebody how to recognize a dog, that's really difficult to codify, because you can say, well, it's got 4 legs and a tail and ears, but so does a cat and so does a fox. So it's really difficult to get to that really good description without being able to go into the machine learning realm, where the computer starts to learn, the model gets to understand what constitutes a dog. So those kind of things fall into the new world of how we can actually start to automate parts of our business that were previously intractable, and we just couldn't. They placed that fundamental restriction on what we were able to automate. So the key questions for you from a business point of view are to say, well, what does this new realm of technology enable, and what does it do more specifically in your organization? Because we can see projects like the picture behind me of the flagship projects of AI around autonomous driving. They're all very exciting and will be amazing over the next 10 years or so. But on a day-to-day basis, we need to look at what AI means in your profession. You may be lucky enough to work for Waymo or Zoox or Cruise or Aurora or any of those, but in most cases, it's not going to be directly relevant to what you do on a day-to-day basis. And of course, there's the drivers behind it in terms of saying that consumers will never ask for AI. Consumers always want a better service. They want it more efficient. They want it cheaper. They want it on their terms. They're not interested in the science fiction. And that's something a lot of business people and technology people, they're often on a different page around what actually is the motivator behind what they're doing. So we've got through the emergence of machine learning and associated technologies. We have moved into a world now of computers that can see. And that has a big change, a mental change for us in terms of evaluating what we can do to use AI in a business context. So we can now visually search. We can look at a picture and something like Pinterest can pick out other pictures that look the same. We couldn't do that just a few years ago. And similarly, you can now point your camera at an outfit and Google Lens is able to identify and offer you the purchase option on each outfit. So that's a huge change, being able to manipulate, being able to understand images algorithmically is a big, big change in what's possible. And of course, I talk about what AI is good for in your business, but a thing that I'm very keen on as well is AI for good. So it's not just about what AI is good for, but what good can AI do? And I think features like the ability to help the visually impaired, the fact that you can hold some groceries up to your Amazon Echo and ask it what it's holding, and it can tell you, that's life-changing if you are visually impaired. So those kind of things, for me, reflect the great advances that AI can drive within businesses. And it's important to think about it. So it's that ability to identify possibility, to identify potential for your business that you may never have thought that your business is in the computer vision space, but maybe there's something it can do. And I think one example of that is somebody, I think this is a powerful example of a business that you wouldn't have thought AI was relevant. So if you make car seats, and you know, the eagle-eyed among you, in case you're wondering, yes, they are Tesla seats, but that's not really relevant to the AI element of it. But that factory, how does AI matter? If your business is making car seats, you might think, I'm not really in the AI business. It's fine for the self-driving tech in the car, but what about the actual seats? But what they found is that because of these advances in AI, in computer vision, around the edge computing, so being able to take a really cheap camera with a little processor and point it at the car seats, they now have automated quality control. So they previously paid somebody to sit and look at the seats and see were they okay, but now they have a tiny little camera and a little chip at the edge that does all of that work. So you're able to automate things that would never have seemed possible before. And of course, the machine doesn't need a break, doesn't need a salary, never complains, and is 100% at identifying defects. It doesn't, you know, blink and miss something the way a human might. So it's just, I think, a useful example of saying, you know, I'm in a car seat business, I'm not in the AI business, but maybe you need to figure out what it means for you. And as well, of course, that computers can see, they can also now hear and talk. And I had an example last year, back when, you know, checking in for an airline was a thing. It's not something I've done since last year, unfortunately, but I had my assistant pop up and it asked me, did I want to check in for my flight the next day? So again, this is an airline who have gotten into the AI business by partnering with Google to provide that functionality. So this might be a bit hard to read on your screens if you're not looking on a big screen. If anybody wants a copy of the slides, just pop me an email after and you can have a look at it. But the basic emphasis on the story is my assistant spoke to me, asked me, did I want to check in, took me through the check-in process, and then issued my boarding pass. And it was such a seamless customer experience that, again, you mightn't think that an airline, United in this case, are in the high-tech business beyond, say, reservations. But that customer experience now, you can see how, because it was so much more simple for me to check in, it does sway you towards that airline in the future and the customer experience. Similarly, I was in Seattle a couple of years back and I was able to say to my assistant, book me a table. The Google Assistant went off, phoned the restaurant on my behalf, and I get an email to say that the booking is made. Just a couple of global examples. So in India, you can now order your KFC if you have no taste in food, but you can order your fried chicken just by speaking to your Alexa. And you can also pay utility bills. So, you know, you would never have thought that restaurants, KFC, utility companies need to be aware of the potential of AI. It feels quite a long way from the high-tech end of AI. This is the real business drivers that you can see actually making a real difference to the consumer experience. And some of the things, just every now and then, I'll just throw out a few questions just to hopefully help you think about what is and isn't important to you as you go on your AI journey. So, you know, one of the things I would say is, you know, where do you see your business over the next 5 to 10 years? What's going to be different in 5 to 10 years time, assuming there's no more pandemics, or, from a business point of view, what do you think is going to change? And what do you think your consumers are going to change? I've seen an awful lot of businesses where they're so obsessed about their own internal view of the world, they forget that their consumers are evolving at the same time. So your consumers are never static. Even though your marketing department may tell you to, build a persona that you want to target, they've segmented all of your customers, but remember, customers are a moving target, and you need to consider, what are they going to be like in 5 to 10 years time? If you choose not to implement a technology, that may be okay. But what if all your consumers have moved ahead with the technology and left you behind? So there's that. And then, of course, what does that mean for your career? And it's not just about answering those questions, because the theme that we have for today is to say, well, what's the AI impact? What does AI do for your career, your business, your customers, and that larger journey over the coming years? And I think it's worth figuring out as well, where do you personally, just take a minute, sit back and go, where do you personally fit on the AI continuum? So when I talk to people about what AI means to them, you get, on one end of the scale, the people who think it'll change everything, and they're very excited about it, but they're only excited because it's cool. And then you have the people who go, yeah, it's nearly here, but maybe it's not quite ready for me. And that's, I guess, the sweet spot that I like to talk to, or to understand the people who are nearly there, but they haven't yet seen the relevance for them. And that's a key, interesting piece to explore, is to say, well, what needs to happen to make it directly, personally relevant for you? And then you have the other end of the scale of people who say, well, it doesn't work, and actually it should be banned because it's going to be dangerous. So AI, a bit unlike the customers I just mentioned, AI is very much a movable feast, and people's perception and view about it. And people struggle a lot, I think, as well, to figure out what's your framework, what's your reference for thinking about AI. And I think one that's useful when you're talking about narrow AI or a very specific model is, it's like getting 10,000 or 1,000,000 interns as a resource. So AI is a bit like having a junior worker on your team, but huge scale. They're probably very good at, you can train them to do one thing, but they're not going to be able to show initiative. They're not going to be able to offer experience. They're just going to be able to do that one task. And that's a useful way of thinking. It's this very specific resource, and how would you use that then at huge scale, at cheap cost in your organization? And you have to figure out, where are you going to aim your AI within the business? And I always caution people at this stage, even though, if you've signed up for Sudha's course, you're keen to learn about AI. But remember, AI is not a destination. It's not something you should seek to do. You don't have to do AI. You have to it's a tool to achieve an actual aim. And it can be small. I think in order to make progress, it can be quite important to think at a quite small level to get started. So I like the example from Newcastle City Council. So Newcastle is a small city, if you're not familiar with it, in the northeast of England. Wouldn't be seen as a particularly exciting place, quite remote from London. But they have deployed AI and are one of the leading users of it, because they just picked a simple task. They said, what if we put a little bot in place on our website so that people can apply for a household waste permit? And they've taken an old process and completely revamped it. And it is AI. It's not glamorous dealing with waste, but it's a good example of an actual genuine business efficiency. And I tend to show this cartoon in almost every talk I give, because it's so relevant to everything. Any business person will tell you they're too busy. it's really difficult to find time to move from what you know. They're so comfortable doing what they know that even if it's really not a great solution, it's what they're comfortable with, it's what they do every day, and they just don't have time to risk something new. So you always get that. I'm sure you've all probably experienced it yourselves. If you're in an organization, you're trying to be a champion for AI, for innovation, that you get a lot of pushback where people just go, yeah, that sounds great, but let's just, keep things as they are. We don't really have time. We don't have budget. So it's very common to have that response. And of course, then there are wider issues. There'll be some really good material coming up over the next few weeks at Sudha's course around ethics. And it's such an important part that we understand alongside the really positive things that AI can do. So AI for good, AI that actually delivers business efficiency. We also have to be really wary around biases coming in to our training data, and therefore making existing biases and existing problems continue and possibly even get worse instead of better. So we'll talk in other sessions about ethics. I don't want to go into that today, but I think it's really important when you're framing your project that you have the right goals in mind. And just one example here that stuck with me when I heard about it was a hospital who trained an AI to look through patient records and make recommendations for discharge. But the goal that they set the system was to speed up discharges. And of course, the system did that very well. But what it hadn't been trained on was that the real measure of success on a hospital discharge is that there's no readmission of the patient because you sent them home too soon. So you have to really think through when you're using AI, is your success criteria the right one? Have you thought of the consequences, the unknowns, and that will happen beyond the simple answers? So it is very important. And there are areas where it's actually a matter of life and death. It doesn't really matter if Netflix recommends the wrong movie to you. It's a bit annoying, and it might be 90 minutes for your life that you won't get back. But compared to other areas, things like predictive policing, justice system trying to measure recidivism when they're considering criminal sentencing, social work. So, these are topics we'll pick up again at a later date rather than today, but it is important context for whatever business area you're in, or if it is a social or a justice area that you're in as well. What are the implications? What are the potential impacts of misusing, misapplying AI, and having that bias hidden in your black box that you can't get at. It really does come down to how have you designed your project, how good is your training data, your testing, and how important is explainability to you. And I think if you're working on AI, it's often a good test to ask yourself personally, how would you feel if you were on the wrong end of a system? And what's more important to you? Do you want a system that's fast? Do you want a system that's transparent? Do you want a system that has been vetted for fairness and accuracy and to tackle bias? So the whole ethics place, we could spend hours talking about it because it really is a fascinating area, but it's just worth a mention for today. But from a business point of view, your challenge probably in your own role or the roles that you want to move into, it comes back to the simple stuff. So understanding what's possible, understanding how that maps to the specific needs in your business, and then understanding the strengths and weaknesses of AI. So is it that AI is good at certain things, it's not particularly good at others? And again, getting the whole organization on board for that it isn't just an IT issue. So AI is not a technology issue. It is a business challenge. And I like to think about, your interactions that you have with your colleagues. And you probably, it's pretty true of yourself as well to some extent. But, there are two things that everybody hates. And one of them is change, and the other are. And if you think about that, that makes it very difficult to make progress. And one little tool that I can give you to try and manage that is to say, like, just think, what are 3 things that could happen to your business? Maybe they're already happening, but can you actually write down what are the 3 things that you think are going to be different in your business in the coming years? Are you able to do that? Have you ever sat back and just said, look, what are the top 3 priorities that could happen that I really need to have thought about? Because things will happen to you. I love, this is another one of my kind of standard slides that I love showing in pretty much any context, because I just think it's fascinating. So this graph, and note the axis there, that it starts at 0 quite high up and is negative for most of the axis. So that graph is a sale of chewing gum in about the last 10 or 12 years. And you go, well, why has chewing gum declined so badly over the last decade? And the reason, if we had longer and we were in a more interactive forum, I'd be asking you for guesses, but the reason is the iPhone. So the iPhone destroyed the sales of chewing gum, because the main point of purchase for chewing gum is when you're queuing at the till to pay for some other item, you pick up a pack of chewing gum. But now, instead of picking up chewing gum, everybody's just on their iPhone while they're queuing. So you can be pretty sure the product manager at Wrigley's didn't lose any sleep the night the iPhone was announced, but they should have, because things happen. And that happens in any industry. If it can happen to chewing gum, it can happen to you. And one other example that I give when I try and talk about changing consumers and how behavior changes. So imagine a scenario where you're out, your house springs a leak, but it's okay because you have a smart home, you have a water sensor that senses the leak. And it then goes and it calls a plumber. And then the plumber comes, and because you have a smart home with cameras and a smart lock, you can remotely, or your assistant can let the plumber in, and then you can pay the plumber. And that's how things will happen in the future, where you're busy and you don't have time to deal with this. But whether it's Alexa or your Google Assistant or Siri, again, platform agnostic here, whichever platform, it will be able to do those kind of things for you. And you go, well, why are you worried about the impact of AI on your business? That's fine, I'm not a plumber. But imagine all the other industries that same customer experience can apply to, where the AI takes over. So how does the AI know which plumber to call? In today's world, you sit down probably and you Google a plumber and you make an evaluation and you pick one. But what if your AI is doing that for you? What does that mean to a plumber? So search engine optimization as a whole area is going to be revolutionized. And again, for the companies who think it's not relevant, one of the general partners at Andreessen Horowitz, big venture capital agency, one of the ways they summed it up was they said, look, this comes down to whether you can innovate quicker than a startup can scale. So however big you are, however advanced you think you are in your thinking, there's some startup somewhere who, in Jeff Bezos's words, your margin is my opportunity. So if you're sitting, pulling in margin without actually delivering value, somebody else is going to come after that. Somebody else is going to try and find and remove the friction in that customer experience. And that poses more questions for you. So, are you ready to innovate? Are you ready to meet consumers So what if consumers are coming to you via new interfaces? So like the assistant booking a restaurant for you, checking you in, calling a plumber. Is your business ready to deal with that? And it doesn't matter whether you're the IRS, you will see customers wanting to change interface and how they interact, because the consumers they're spoiled. They get great service from most businesses, and they have huge expectations now that every business will be available to them when they want them on their terms. So you need to be innovating and saying, what technologies, what is there for me? And not innovating isn't an option. The definition of insanity is to just keep doing what you're doing and expecting things to change. So if you don't innovate, things won't change for the better. They may change for the worse. But one of the things that I think people often forget when I talk to them about innovation is a continuum. It's not just one thing. And we've all probably had a scene like this where your boss rocks up and says, we need to do something incredible. And you go away and you think really hard and you do your research and you go back with something that is really incredible. And then they go, that's a bit risky. That's a little bit too incredible. So it can be hard to find that sweet spot for innovation. And I think it's reassuring to know that 70% of all innovation is actually fairly simple. It's just incremental innovation. It's not a huge breakthrough. It's not a game changer. It doesn't even have to be disruptive. So it's perfectly acceptable. And in fact, it's positive to just be doing incremental innovation. Not everything has to be the leap from a regular car to a self-driving car. If it's like our Newcastle City Council example earlier, where they were just able to take a 2-week process and make it a couple of minutes, that's actual innovation. And that's the kind of thing that should be exciting you as being practical, being pragmatic. And one tip that I would give you is to say, it's very helpful to keep a list of what you're not doing. An awful lot of people keep to-do lists, but I'm recommending you keep a list of the things you don't do. And then, it can be private, but explain to yourself why you're not doing something. So make sure that your decisions not to do things are as conscious as your to-do list. So, is it that you're not doing it because it's too expensive? Is it because you don't think it's relevant? Is it because it's actually just too hard? Is it that you're meeting, resistance to it? Is it that you've too much other operational pressure? You've too much to do? But I think a list like that will actually help you reflect and figure out, what do I need to do for my business? Is AI going to be the tool that I need? And even just look around every now and then and say, what's the most impressive thing that you've seen a competitor do in the last quarter or the last year? And I've asked a lot of CEOs this question, where they tell me, we're focused on operational efficiency. We're not going to do anything too risky or innovative. And then you ask them, well, who do you admire? Who do you think is doing a good job? And most of them, unfortunately, look back at you blank. But it's an important question. What level of awareness have you got? Because as I said right at the start, it's okay to choose not to use AI, but you need to make sure you're making that decision on solid ground. You need to know what it is doing, what it's not doing, what your competitors can do, and then figure out where you fit in it. Because innovation is bigger than technology. It may be that all you need to do in the next quarter is improve your processes. You don't need to start building AI models. You need to start learning about them. You need to start thinking where you're going to get your data. You need to start thinking about the quality of your data. But the innovation element is what's everybody's responsibility. The technology isn't. The technology, the building the models, the training, that sits with the data scientists and the data engineers. And then the product managers have got to be that bridge into the business and able to speak to both sides of it, but being able most of all to look at that big picture, to be able to say, what does the business need? And again, a couple of other tools to help you think about how you might approach it. So, what would you do? What would you do if you had unlimited resources? What's your greatest fear in the business? What's the worst thing that could happen? And if you start thinking about those, it's going to help you understand where to start focusing your innovation. Where do you need to be thinking about fixing stuff? And another tool I find quite useful is to rate yourself. Where are you on the continuum? So, are you, and this, you can look at this continuum either on a personal level or on a business level. And you can say, organizationally, do we want to be the best in the class? And again, it's absolutely okay not to be best in class. If you think that leading is the right place for your organization, the right fit for your consumers, then that's okay. Maybe best in class isn't what you should be focused on. A lot of times that's where people start. And I'm not against being best in class by any means, but I think it's important that you figure out if you're the right organization. Maybe best in class is going to break your organization. And actually, if you could just move from lagging to gaining over the next 12 months and set chasing as your ambition, leading in 3 years' time, maybe that's the right path. But if you try and jump all the way to best in class, that's going to be pretty tough. And as you do this, again, it's not all just about the technology. I've seen so many companies lose focus and they start to miss the consumer out of their thinking because they're so hell-bent on AI that they forget about the consumer. Now, AI can be a great help in understanding the consumer, looking in the data for the signals from the consumer, identifying patterns, absolutely can do that. But it is still important to remember that the AI is a tool, not the destination. So I think, just to wrap things up, the incrementalist approach, to be able to say, look, we're going to do this gradually. It doesn't have to be a big bang approach. We can do a proof of concept, and that can be your foundation then for more. It is important to remember an awful lot of innovation is about combining existing tools and using them appropriately. And there are terrific models available that you can get on the Amazon cloud, the Google cloud, the Microsoft cloud. They all have APIs available for you to play with models. And then there are commercial implementations as well. There is no point in a lot of cases reinventing the wheel. So if there's something specific to your industry, absolutely, you may need your own model. But if you're actually just doing a bot for customer service, you're probably better off to take something that's pre-baked and use that as your proof of concept to show the potential that the technology has. And again, in terms of how you think about this, the cliche of thinking outside the box, it's actually still a bit limiting, because you're better to think like there isn't a box, and you're better to say, you need to get away from the mindset of objecting to change, sitting back, thinking what it is. If you were, the Amazon mindset is frequently held up as a good example, where they try and think everything is day one. We're just starting out. What do we do today? And not be always held back by legacy issues. And think, what is your ideal scenario? What would you do if you could? And work back from that, rather than starting necessarily from where you are. And then just a caution in terms of remembering that, not all change is great. You need to be doing it from a perspective of progress. Just changing one bad old process for another bad process, that isn't the goal. It may feel you've done something, but unless it actually has value, you're not really meeting the goals that you need there. And one other graphic that I like as a way of thinking about things, depending on whether you're assessing things objectively. So is something measured that it's just a failure or a success? Or again, is it a continuum? You'll get the sense, I like talking about continuums. And how will it be perceived? How can you perceive what you're doing? Again, this is a bit small to read, but if you want a copy of it, this is a self-assessment tool that Accenture have published, specific to the retail industry, but quite generally applicable, about how do you assess yourself? Are you doing the right things? Just a scorecard to fill in. And I'll finish on this. Just a reminder, this is from, as you'll have seen from the picture behind me, I do have a soft spot for the self-driving cars, but technology isn't flawless. And your job, if you're in an AI product manager role, is you have to manage it. You need to be aware of its strengths and its weaknesses. And this is an image from the latest Tesla software showing what their cameras see. So, it's pretty obvious. You would look at that picture and say, oh, there's a pedestrian behind a bus. But when you actually look at what did the cameras see? So, they see a picture of a human. It's misinterpreting. So, when they say that the camera never lies, in this case, the camera is lying pretty badly. And you need to be aware. So you need to figure out, how do you mitigate for that scenario? Is that an edge case? Is it something that's going to matter in your business? Is it that you should have put LiDAR as well as camera on your car? There's a lot for you to figure out as you manage it. There will be more from me on these topics on if you're enrolled in Sudha's class on Tuesday evenings in Stanford Continuing Studies. I will be giving another talk on the 27th about invisible AI. And then there are the books. My contact details are there if anybody wants to get in touch with any questions. But we should have 5 or 10 minutes now if Sneha or anybody else has any questions. So I'll stop sharing. All right, so are there any questions?
I don't see any questions, but I think there are some comments here. One of which was, I think, incremental innovation is absolutely valuable. I think we we get these targets as product manager where, hey, come up with something, and the value of very slowly, incrementally adding new features, getting our customers used to it, and getting feedback, and then deciding the direction of your features is so much helpful than just taking a big bang approach and putting something in front of customers that surprises them. And then I think you also asked about one of the problems that your business would face in future. And I think one problem that I see is that our customers are maturing so much outside from the products that are outside our product or our space, that they come back expecting some AI-like features without saying this is AI. Like, hey, why can't I get a notification when this happens? Why can't you predict that I'm going to be actually interested in this product and based on my history? So there are a lot of feature requests that come in that technically they never will say, hey, we want AI. They would point at some features like AI or other products that have AI. But I think this was really helpful. Can we? So you mentioned that we should email you if you want the slides.
Yeah, sure, no problem. We can put them on Driverless World School, but if anyone wants to email me directly, there the email is fine either.
And then if people want to contact you, can they can contact you on LinkedIn?
Yeah, find me on LinkedIn or just david.kerrigan@gmail either will find me.
Okay, cool. There's one last comment or question. It says, would like to hear intelligent edge rollout and deployment in various use cases. What are the standard in place, and as it is a little complex. So I think this is a little more on the technology part of it. And Sanjay, this is a question from Sanjay. Sanjay, we do have some more sessions coming forward where we would go deep into the technology and talk about the edge rollouts and technology around it. But having said that, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much, David, for your time and the slides. I think we're on time, so thanks for attending. You all have a good week. We'll see you next Wednesday. But before I leave, we do have Pragati here today, and I think she was here. Next week she will be talking about responsible AI, which will be very, very interesting. So do tune in next week. Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.